All right. So, hello everybody. I'm Jeff Elsloo, and I am going to be talking about Traffic Router and the Tomcat 8.5 upgrade project that we've been working on for quite some time now. And so we're going to talk about basically what we've been doing, and then Tomcat 8.5, and then we're going to talk about ApacheCon a little bit. So some of the changes that we put in since last summit are deep caching. We don't really have the dynamic piece of that yet. The popularity stuff we're going to be working on in the future, especially the popularity engine part of that. Not sure where we'll land on open sourcing that part, but the deep, so they won't let us do that. So the deep caching aspect of it and the integration point, the handoff point to a custom. Oh, is that a mic that we need to use? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't know that. The integration point for where we would hand it off to the popularity service, we need to complete that work so that we can have a pluggable, sort of system for this. So that's going to be coming in the future. But we did get deep caching in there, and that's roughly, the ability to basically have an even deeper coverage zone file that is more specific. And we use that at Comcast to localize people to head ends, so we can prevent the egress out of the head end to the general network in the metropolitan area, basically.
Jeff?
Yeah?
We added some plugins to Traffic Router for something else, but I don't think we've open sourced the plugin part of it. So maybe we should see if we can open source that stuff.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great, because I think we've had other people with different use cases that have said it would be good if we could have a plugin style architecture. Obviously, I don't know what all is in your plugin architecture, but
we added some hooks to Traffic Router at different points to call into some other classes.
Like compile time plugin system as well. Yeah, okay.
So I can show you that stuff.
Well, it may not even be compiled. It might be like purely runtime. You can do some.
You can do that.
Yeah, you throw a jar in the class path and magic happens. Yeah. So anyway, that sounds pretty cool. So.
So I'll show you what we have as far as the plugins.
Okay.
Yeah, or not interested or not.
Yeah, totally interested in at least checking it out. So, second bullet item here is the eDNS client subnet extensions. Eric and I guess his boss, I don't know if his boss is here, worked on that. That took way too long to merge, and we finally got it in. So my apologies for how long that took, but it's in there now, and I've tested it on our side and works as you would expect. So that was a big one. That allows us to do localization of client IPs using DNS. If you don't know what that feature is.
Do you guys have customers running eDNS, and do you run it?
I don't have it yet, but that's in the plan.
The customer who asked for it isn't using it yet.
The customer who asked for it is using it? Not yet, but you are planning on using it. I'd be very interested in hearing how you guys fare with that, and how it works on the resolvers, and what kind of issues you have with that.
Yeah, +1, because our DNS team was not real receptive to this plan.
So us, they're just going to enable it on the CDN hostname.
Right. So I want to know what your experience is with that, because then we can use that as ammo to go argue with our DNS team. And I know you guys run Nominum as well, so that's what our corporate infrastructure is too, for the external side anyway.
It looks like they were pretty receptive, but getting to testing it kind of, as it died.
Yeah. You got to kind of stay on top of them.
Every time I ask for it, it dies.
Yeah.
It's the most important thing in the world, apparently.
Yeah.
So do you have this turned on in your DNS
No,
infrastructure?
no, not yet. We don't even have it deployed yet, to be honest. So another thing that went in recently was Gzip Accept-Encoding. That was something that Rob's been berating us for a while on getting support for, because he put support into Traffic Monitor for this. So all of the monolithic CR-config grabs are now going to be compressed if you deploy this version of Traffic Router, which should be good. Although Steve's probably going to whine about CPU utilization going up potentially. So that was good, and then we did some work to get us in a position to get the poorly licensed dependencies pulled out, and that was JSON.org primarily, but it was also getting the JDNSSEC stuff pulled out of the actual critical path in the main code line. One thing worth mentioning though is that I sort of made an executive decision with the guy that was working on it, Jesse Rivas, on our team, to leave it in there as a counter test, basically. So we've got some stuff that we can basically use JDNSSEC to double check our native implementation of DNSSEC. So we basically use two libraries to generate the same thing and make sure they match. So JDNSSEC is still in there, but it isn't absolutely required. And if it turns out that we need to pull it out of the test code path, we can do that too. I just wanted it in there for additional safety because when we were working through this, we found a bug, and it was also somewhat related to the PR that Malenfant submitted for the text record support. No, but that really actually did help because we were working on this other thing, and when I pulled that in, it broke because of the JDNSSEC stuff, and it actually helped find a bug in the native implementation that we didn't know about.
That was my intent.
Yeah, like a boss.
So just to clarify, so we're in the traffic router, we're now doing like our own DNSSEC, like it's all our own.
We haven't deployed that code yet at Comcast, but yes, and we've had that code for a long time. Had we switched over to that, we potentially would have hit that bug and would have been in rough shape.
What's the plan for us to deploy that?
Just get it done, basically.
Just to turn on toggle.
Yeah, that's all. And actually, no, that goes away because there is no alternative at that point.
So I'm wondering what the stuff it gets from traffic ops, because like I was just working with this, putting in a traffic ops go line. So like does it work with anything it gets from traffic ops? Like right, so that DNSSEC stuff is in React and we flow it through. So if it's like, I know it's RSA now, but if it gets something in that config that's a DNS config, but it's a standard bind format, and it gets something that's extra, is it going to work, or do we only work with RSA? Or?
I would have to look at the code to know for sure. I would be surprised if it was that flexible because we were solving for a very narrow space. The other library that we used is much more comprehensive than our implementation, so I wouldn't be surprised if we had to do something special to handle a different format.
Yeah, and it should be fine today. I'm mostly just curious because, again, I was putting it in traffic ops go line, and we used a library for that, and I kind of noticed the same thing. Like, we could have done it ourselves with the RSA and just figuring out this is the exact format, but as it is, because we're using a library, we could just flip a switch to ECDSA or whatever else is supported.
Right.
It would just be flipping a switch in GoLine. I was just wondering, will that work in the router?
I don't think so because we did have to do specifically do the RSA implementations and stuff like that. So anyway, geolocation default latitude, longitude override. I don't know how prevalent this problem is for other users, but at Comcast we have a lot of off-net traffic as well as on-net traffic, and sometimes the off-net traffic is not able to be localized properly, and what happens is MaxMind has set default lats and longs for every single country, and if they know that you're in an ASN that belongs in the US but they have no idea where you are, especially with like IPv6 addresses, you end up getting pointed to a lake that's in Kansas, which is like, you know, geographically in the middle of the country. But what ends up happening is with the magneting approach for how we do localization, you end up magneting to whatever is closest for that default lat long, and for us that's Denver. And that means that for every single delivery service, the default lat long is always Denver, and we've got no ability to move that traffic anywhere. So the geolocation default latitude longitude override gives us some flexibility to control that.
Is that per delivery service, or how did we end up doing that?
I think what was implemented at first was a config level thing that's like global, and I don't think we got the delivery service config in there, but that's like the next step from there. It was more important for us to be able to move all that stuff out of Denver because Denver, for Comcast, you guys don't want to know about our deployment, but we've got a much larger cache group in Chicago because Chicago is much bigger than Denver. So it's, you know, sometimes we want to maybe move all of that to the bigger cache group than the default one because really, you know, I mean, the way that routing works and all of that, magneting to Denver may not actually be the best. So there are a lot of big pipes that go into Chicago, and we've got a lot of caches there, so that's a good location for us too. That's usually where our default lat long is on every delivery service, but because we don't actually get to that case, the traffic doesn't end up there because we're getting the lat and the long that points to that lake. So it's not a null response from MaxMind. What's that?
It's not a geo miss. No, they actually
Right, it's
say
not a
it's
miss.
in the lake in Kansas,
Right.
and we're like, well, you don't know where it is. Tell us
Right.
if you don't know.
So the geo
Right.
miss is not really useful.
Right, and you're sort of at MaxMind's mercy at
Yeah.
that point, right? So whatever they do to their database in terms of how they handle these sorts of situations is completely up to them. And I think that's why Steve has taken it upon himself to hack the Maximind database a couple of times. Like the hacker he is. I don't know if you've caught on to a theme here, but Steve's one of the more brave hackers that we have in the community, I think. So
just treating a result for this lake in Kansas as a null, essentially.
Basically, yeah. If you see the lat and the long that's in the mapping, you override it and you send it somewhere else. So speaking of Steve's prolific hacking, the next one on here is text record support. So Steve had a use case where he wanted to do static text records on a delivery service for, I don't know what your, for Let's Encrypt?
Yeah, so we can use wildcard search now on CDN delivery service.
That would be a cool thing to do a demo of, if you get that all working.
Yeah, you could do a lightning talk.
Like today, I could do today.
That would be pretty cool, because we've talked about it, but every time we start thinking about it, all of the moving pieces you have to put in place to get it working kind of makes it
You'll probably find out
pain in the
it takes
butt.
about 5 seconds.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got like 6 Ansible playbooks and it's all done.
No, not even Ansible.
Okay.
It's all manual.
All right. So, and then finally, you guys, if you've seen me talk before, we did bug fixes. We always do bug fixes. So that's a boring one. So on deck, right now, we're still kind of working on the Tomcat 8.5 integration and load testing piece. And we had a contractor working on the actual development side of it, and he's kind of transitioning off to work on the self-service stuff now. So I've been kind of taking over some of the integration testing, and then the load testing, we have a different initiative to do load testing for ATS and Grove, and I may throw Traffic Router into that mix as well to do the TLS load testing specifically. Beyond that, we also need to do some functional / integration testing around like certificate changes, updates, things like that. We have done that testing, but we need to like do it with load and scale and all that involved.
Some of the initial testing looking on that.
Promising.
Yeah.
There's no degradation at all going to 8.5 in terms of just general performance for DNS and HTTP 302 redirects. All of that stuff is 100% fine. We expect the performance to increase, obviously, because we're using native OpenSSL, which should be faster than JNI, and we're also using APR. So we get several accelerations in that process. We're still going to suffer from not being able to use AES NI because, we'll use it for a teeny portion of the transaction and then the client's gone. So we don't have with the bulk efficiency with AES NI, but
because you don't actually have the connection long enough.
Yeah.
right, we can make use of that on the edge for sure, and we do. But they're in and out of Traffic Router so quick.
Like manifest manipulators will have multiple connections.
No,
Persistent connections from those guys would really help.
Yeah.
So,
Support connection keep alive if the client wants to?
we've never really
No, we never
had
thought
to even
about
think
that.
about it,
Maybe
so I don't know.
We should think about it.
Yeah. So the other thing is we've got the anonymous proxy blocking PR out there. There's also a cache group failover PR out there. What's that?
The anonymous proxy one, I feel like we've been talking to Peter and Eric about that for a year.
Right. Well, but we had tried to assign Jesse to it, and we're trying to track down we're trying to track down the database from Maximind, try to get a copy of it, but they're having an offsite this week. So, but anyway, we are actively trying to get that one tested. If we can get a copy of the database, we can move forward on that. Nir?
Yeah. Two questions. The geolocation based steering is regular steering, it's not client steering.
No, this is client steering as well. So we had a request where basically we want to tie a client to a particular delivery lane based on the lat and the long of the origin on the other side of the delivery service. So seems kind of strange, but because of some of the unique use cases that we had with some of our other CDN deployments, this was kind of necessary. So Roland Peters is currently working on that right now, and what is dependent upon all of this is a huge origin refactor. Right now we just, for some of the origins, they end up as like server entries and stuff like that. So he's going through all of that and fixing that first, and then he's putting this other stuff on top. Because you have to be able to associate a lat and a long with an origin, and when you start talking about an origin on a delivery service on the delivery service table versus the MSO config that's in the server table, stuff gets really messy. So we're taking the time to refactor all of that right now, basically.
Okay, and second the fourth item, control cache group failover.
Yeah, there's a PR on that. That's in the same space in terms of unique requirements from our CDN providers, but I believe this wasn't even started by us. It was a Cisco thing. But we need it too, so we're invested as well. Yeah. Instead of using the natural failure protocol that we've been using.
Some network, I mean, Cisco wrote it, so obviously they have the same problem as us, but there's some networks aren't designed in a way that the traffic router can just go to the next closest cache group. Like, we'll totally blow out a link. So we have to be able to identify what the failover cache group is going to be.
Right, and I think at Comcast we've been living off, the fat whale, so to speak. Like, we've got a really good network, and all of our head-ends are really well equipped, and like the way that we've been engineering and the way that we've been told to think about these things is to like not even worry about the bandwidth and things like that. So we see all of our head-ends sort of as equals, and we don't, the failover to the next closest thing is always just kind of okay. Plus, we won't lose enough caches in a given cache group for that to even occur. That would be, I've never seen that happen. So that the failover to the next best cache group really doesn't even happen.
Just a suggestion
Don't we get that on top during peak? Sometimes like we'll fill up Denver and we'll start sending people out.
Hence what I said on this slide about being able to move our clients around. Yeah. But yes, we have had, I guess we have had that on top.
Yeah.
That is a good point.
That's a scary sight when you have a whole cache group pretty much going red.
Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of business reasons for why that happened that has nothing to do with traffic control.
No, you need better.
Well, but like things like the ATS, the way that ATS does RAM cache, for example, on top of the disk cache, plus the actual RAM volumes, ends up eating into what we actually can do with some of these delivery services, and it starts eating into your ability to actually serve traffic efficiently because you blow out those caches and now you're just doing disk I/O, and everything suffers at that point. And then your load averages go up, then everything starts failing within the cache group, and before you know it, you're on to the next one. So yeah, Newman was right. We have had it happen on top. So.
Did you say we don't have the ability to, with MSO, go to regional origins?
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, you could. You'd just configure it to point to wherever it needs to point.
We have that. We have parent cache groups.
Right. Yeah, we just can't associate the lat and long. That's what I said.
Right.
So we don't know where that origin is. Because if I want to because of our requirements, if I want to say, if you sit in Denver, let's go to this lane that goes there. I mean, it's.
So we
that was something
care about
that-
more what made us close to what origin, not.
But that was something that MVC wanted us to do as well, actually, where they were like, if you're on the West Coast, we want you to flow to the West Coast to the Amazon West origins, and if you're on the East Coast, we want you to go to the
We can
Amazon
do
East
that, but what I'm
origins.
saying is we can do that without, you just assign the West Coast mids to go to the, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but we don't want to deal with that BS. I mean, that's a lot of moving parts.
The client actually decides which one to use.
Well, yeah.
We're not talking MSO, we're talking client steering.
Yeah, we order the list in client steering
Yeah.
based off of the lat and the long of the client and the origin list.
I thought you were talking
So we
about
match the
classic.
client to the origin, and then
Oh,
we
yeah,
order
client
it.
steering, so like, I didn't catch the distinction
Yeah. So we're glad that we've got Cisco with the controlled cache group failover, whatever you guys call that, and the anonymous proxy stuff and the EDNS stuff. So we've been getting some really good contributions to Traffic Router there from Cisco. So thanks for all of that. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about self-service. One thing that did come up yesterday at some point was health protocol to traffic routers. It's definitely something that I want to see happen. And then we can dynamically modify that RR set for our HTTP routing names, and we could potentially modify the ENS RR sets as well. So if we do have a traffic router that goes down, the health protocol takes it out of service automatically, and we don't have anybody, generally clients will try, and then it fails, and they'll try the next one, and okay, we're good. But that try is a delay, so it introduces a little bit of unnecessary latency potentially. 1 over in number of traffic routers, you could potentially hit a down one, and that's not great. So,
The client that chose when one traffic router is not reachable.
Yeah.
right, yeah. So,
It's a pretty big client. It's not you guys. Sorry.
well, we've worked with our set top team and the player team a lot to make sure that they behave well. But it's not surprising to hear that some clients don't behave well. I mean, that's common on CDN. So Tomcat 8.5. So I don't know how much everybody knows about Tomcat 8.5 or our Tomcat deployment in general, but we don't use most of what Tomcat is. We use it as a simple servlet container, and that's it. And we have basically one servlet that's deployed that is the receiver for all of the 302s that we have to do. So with Tomcat 8.5, they've completely rewritten the way that they do TLS, and so they've integrated with TC native, and they've rewritten all of the SSL engines inside of Tomcat itself, and they've made them very flexible, provided lots of different options, but we kind of ignored all of those options and landed on what we wanted, which was basically the best mix of those options. And that was after Newman and I talked to Mark Thomas and some of the people at ApacheCon. Mark Thomas is the guy that basically runs the Tomcat project. And so we talked to them. They did a couple TLS related talks, and based off of those conversations, we kind of had an idea of what we wanted to use, and that ended up being APR with OpenSSL. So that's going to be a huge performance increase potentially from the JCE implementation that we're using right now, which is just the Java cryptography engine or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a slide about it, but it's worth noting that we chose Tomcat 8.5 because there is a Tomcat 9 that they're end-of-lifing because they kind of gave up on. They tried to make some more drastic changes and it didn't really work out.
It's like broken.
So then they went back.
Perl 6, you mean?
Then they went back to 8.5 off of the 8 branch, and so 8.5 is really the master branch, even though there is a 9.0 out there.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing, but it does still look like they're kind of working on 9. I
just saw some on the mailing list the other day. They said they're getting ready to.
Oh, good. Okay.
Like 8.5 will be the official.
So another thing is, obviously we're saying performance should be better, which is better. So we need to get confirmation on that, run some load tests through there. Eric, it might be good to maybe run this through your test bed. If I recall correctly, you had something that was doing like 80,000 transactions per second last time we talked. So if we could get this through your guys' system too for more testing and exposure and all of that, especially in light of that APR issue that we had with the prior version of Tomcat.
What time frame are you looking at?
What's that?
What's the time frame here?
I don't know when the PR is going to be.
I don't know. Hopefully we'll have something, a PR and a mailing list email sometime in the next month or so.
Okay.
But I mean, we're not going to expect you to like jump on it and turn it around right away.
No,
but
I just want to make sure that we can schedule it appropriately.
Okay.
So I can plan it out.
Okay.
4 to 6 weeks, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have something, Steve?
Yeah, it's just like seamless upgrade process. Sorry, down there. You know how we do a service Tomcat restart today?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that traffic router instead?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Let's finish this slide.
Okay.
So
When you say APR in this context, what do you mean?
Apache portable runtime.
Tomcat?
Yeah. TC native.
That's an HTTP thing.
It's a Tomcat thing now.
Really?
Yeah. So, and I haven't been in the guts in this, admittedly. I mean, like I said, I'll get on this. Newman started it, and our contractor, Andrew, he spent a significant amount of time on this. I was more like an advisor on this. So one tidbit that he did mention, though, is that we will be fully SNI compliant. Apparently, the implementation that we have now might have a couple of issues with that. So I don't know much more about that than what I just said, though, because that was something he passed along. So I wanted to convey that to the group. The biggest thing on this slide that we need to talk about is CentOS support. So managing the if CentOS 7 do this, if CentOS 6 do this is starting to turn into some insanity, and I would like to just jettison CentOS 6 support if we can do that, and just rely on systemd and just do that going forward. But I wanted to kind of take the temperature of the room and see. I know for Comcast that won't be a problem. We do have some CentOS 6 traffic routers out there today, but I'm already working on getting those upgraded through our SRE team. Is anybody out there running traffic router on CentOS 6 in
I
the.
would say we need to move to CentOS 7 for everything.
Okay.
Just
So it sounds like it's a no-brainer. So we will have to obviously take that to the list, and so what I want to do when I go back is kind of convey what we talked about here to Andrew and have him be kind of the communication of this to the list so he can get some credit and some community points for his contributions as well.
And this might warrant like a 3.0 release, and at that point we might as well drop all CentOS 6.
Yeah. What is?
I would be +1 on doing that. I don't know how we want to handle the versioning, but I feel like CentOS 6 is ancient,
I don't
so.
Well, it's still maintained right now, that's the problem, but I mean, we're not going to use it.
Right.
We have nothing still on CentOS 6.
Okay.
Nothing?
Nothing.
So maybe this becomes a bigger topic on the mailing list.
Yeah, CentOS 6 support generally.
I think maybe that is what Newman said. We drop CentOS 6 support.
And call that 3.0.
Go to 3.0.
And we won't talk about API versioning at all when we talk about this, because that will be a ball of wax.
So it's, I'm off. I don't know what is 3.0.
3.0 just means that
Yeah, it's 2.3.
a major version.
Breaking changes, basically. Anytime we want to, yeah.
We don't want to do that in the dot
But
release.
we want them to the 3. We'll have 3.0.
Maybe, but what does it matter?
No, just I just want to know what's 3.0.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to go from 2.2 to 2.3 and be like, oh, in this one little minor release, we dropped all of our support for CentOS 6.
Right.
Yeah, but we haven't seen on when we want this version.
I'll bring that up to the list. That was my team.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Sorry, Jeff, for derailing.
That's all right. I'm the last talk, so we've got time. So also another important bullet point just under that is we now have a Tomcat RPM. So that ghetto wget that the RPM does at install time that people may or may not be aware of, that basically happens once, and if you're not paying attention, you don't know it happened, and then it never happens again. Not managed by the RPM process at all. It's like the worst thing in the world. So we got rid of that, and I will talk more about the specifics of the Tomcat RPM because Andy really did some cool stuff in there, but it is somewhat of a drastic change. So now I am feeling this 3.0 thing. So native package dependencies, APR and OpenSSL are dependencies of Tomcat native, and Tomcat native is in the EPEL or EPEL repository. So that's another thing that we need to discuss on the list, which I imagine everybody's okay with pulling in an RPM from there, but it is something to talk about.
If you're going to dev, you got to put on your workstation.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And you gotta, if you're going to develop, you got to do brew install Tomcat native, and all of these dependencies have to be satisfied as well on your development machine. So anyway, that's one of the major reasons why CentOS 6 support doesn't sound too appealing, because we've got, for example, the POM file for building traffic router references the versions that we're dependent upon, and I don't want to have to do some backflips in Maven to figure out how to do this dependency on this version for CentOS 6 builds and this one for CentOS 7. It's just, you know, we're getting very little utility out of maintaining all that additional complexity, so it's not worth it. So the other thing is the seamless upgrade process. Like I said, Andrew has spent some time to go through that, have an existing install, upgrade to the new version, and it all just works. And considering what we're doing, it's pretty impressive that you don't have to have like caveats and go do manual steps and stuff like that. So that's nice, and that's part of what I'm working on right now, is to ensure that that goes as smooth as possible. And if we can rip out any of the CentOS 6 crap, it'll go even better. So going into the details about this, so like I said, we've got 2 RPMs now. Besides those dependent RPMs, we've got a Tomcat RPM and we've got a traffic router RPM. And now, instead of Tomcat being opt Tomcat with a conf directory and a server.xml and a web.xml and a web apps directory, and the war gets exploded under there, basically this is all Tomcat. All Tomcat is now, the RPM, I've deleted all the files that are listed under this directory structure, but essentially all this is the place where the Tomcat bits live, and that's it. The reason why I have highlighted this service file, this systemd unit file, is because while we install it, and it's called Tomcat, which is what you currently say to stop and start Tomcat. It isn't what we actually use. So this is one thing that will need to be in a release note, and yet another reason why we may want to increment to 3.0 is because all of your automation that's built around service, traffic router, stop start is going to have to change to Tomcat stop start is going to have to change to traffic router stop start. So Tomcat is Tomcat. That's all it is. There is no traffic router crap mixed in, and the reason why that's important is because you end up in RPM dependency hell sometimes. Like right now, it's not a problem because OpTomcat is not part of the RPM. But if we were to try to take that same approach and start mixing in traffic router config files under that directory structure of OpTomcat, we'd get into trouble. So because Andy has done development in Tomcat before in a past life, he knew that he could split it out and basically just use a base install for traffic router and then reference that install, or base install of Tomcat and then reference that install from traffic router, and it actually works out really good. So what that looks like, I'll show you on the next slide, but basically traffic router is traffic router. There's no mixed in stuff, and they're kind of distinct things. So, but what that does mean is now there's more stuff under the traffic router directory structure. Conf contains Tomcat stuff now. Lib contains dependent jars. Web apps is now located under traffic router, and we can now control traffic router by using systemctl stop start traffic router.
So is all this being duplicated as well for traffic monitor? Or I guess traffic monitor is going to...
No, totally unrelated, and you might be asking that because you're probably running the Java version
still. On Java, yeah.
So we talked about this a while ago on the list, but you know, we kind of renamed the directory structure as well. So from my side of the world, we're not really planning on investing any time on the Java side. So so yeah,
switch to Go, basically.
Yep.
If you can stomach the increased CPU utilization, yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, I think we found out why the
Yeah.
users is up.
For Bitcoin mining? Traffic monitor is, every time you install a traffic monitor, go.
Hey, shh! You're not supposed to tell them about the coin miner we put in there. All right, so what this directory structure looks like is this now. I hope none of you are color receptive deficient, because that's green. But basically the stuff that I put in green was kind of to highlight the new things that are important that differ from the prior way of doing things. And then I kind of ripped out some of the ancillary stuff that's always been there. So we get a new systemd unit called traffic router. We get the server.xml is now located under there. Logging.properties is another Tomcat thing. All of those jars in there, those are dependent jars. You might also notice BC Prov, that's Bouncy Castle, which we're relying on in the implementation. And then again, we've got the work directory, temp directory, web apps, all of that's Tomcat-y stuff. This is what the server.xml looks like now. It largely looks the same. You will probably also notice that we're using the NIO protocol only for the TLS connector, and I plan to change that to potentially use on the non-TLS connector as well. I don't know why Andy did that, so we're going to talk about that. Yeah, we might have just updated that one connector, right? And so what's kind of new? Some of these attributes are a little different, but the main thing is this pointer in green here that is to the fully qualified class name for our implementation for this thing. And this is kind of sort of how you configure Tomcat 8.5 now. What's that?
Where do you see that?
No.
Oh, Comcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we still have an issue for renaming the package structure? Maybe we can take care of that with a 3.0 thing. But that's going to be a huge diff when we do that. Oops, what's up?
So let's say you don't want to use port 80, you want to run it on a different port.
Uh-huh.
You still need to manually change this connector port in the server.xml.
Yes, that's correct.
Is there any plan to have that tied in with traffic ops somehow, with the TCP port and traffic ops?
I mean,
No.
well,
Well, right now it's under the Tomcat config.
and it
so
sort of is because we've got that JMX shim for the API port, so there is some knowledge of it, but there is kind of like a chicken and egg thing about how Tomcat starts up and how Tomcat in the container is external to the web application that runs within it. So then you have to start doing some crazy backflips if you want to intervene in that process. which is what we did for the language connector. We don't open that socket until we get the ready signal. So we could maybe extend that a little bit further to do open up the port. We'd have to get injected earlier into the process, but we could potentially do it.
Okay.
I don't know that the Comcast is going to want to spend time on that though, because I don't know that we have that use case. So, all right, here's Steve. Do you approve? This is System CTL Status Traffic Router, something that's probably been way too long in the coming, but it's finally here. So that.
We changed it to camel case.
All right, so that's that. So here's some final stuff that we need to get done. Basically, we need to come up with a final decision on CentOS 6 support. We need potentially more dev test time if it turns out that people are -1 on ditching CentOS 6. Load testing, obviously, we want to get that done. And when we're doing load testing, I want to do integration testing at the same exact time, so we find out, if you snapshot the CR config, does this whole thing just explode? Things like that. We haven't done that at scale with the load test, so we need to confirm all of that stuff. Functionally, that all works. I've tested all of that. Andy's tested all of that. It all works great. But we just don't know about load. That load always changes the situation, or can change the situation. So again, more integration testing. We need to get this PR open, and we need to get a mailing list discussion going. But I was sort of having Andy hold off on that because I wanted to make sure that we could kind of get a feel for how people felt here before we went to that next step, because I feel like if we would have just sent this all out with the PR, it would have been way too much to, there'd be like 900 questions, and it's way too much to kind of digest. So I wanted to seed people's brains in this conversation for when that happens. So that's kind of happened next. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of PRs open on Traffic Router from Cisco specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Can we commit to merging those before we open this and create all kinds of merge help for those guys? Please?
Yeah, potentially. Some of them, there's one of them that won't merge right now.
Yeah,
but
I think
there are a few open.
We want to work with the originators and not like put the big change and then have all the, right? I think
yeah, but I think like anonymous and the anonymous proxy one and the cache group failover one, I expect that stuff to be done relatively soon. And there's like one other one out there, so I think we can do that.
It's not a ton of code that changed, to be honest. I mean,
right.
It was like difficult. At least I don't know how much Andy's changed since I did it. I mean, it was difficult to figure it out, but it wasn't like a whole bunch of code that changed.
Yeah, and it's likely to be changed in places where other people aren't really playing. I mean, this is all like way down in the guts of Traffic Router. Not all of it, obviously, but the most of it is.
It's frustrating when you have a PR open and then.
Yeah, for sure. And outside of all of this, I mean, we just need to get better at that in general. PR submitters need to be better about working within the community to make sure that they're trying to get their stuff actively merged rather than just PR dropping. And then us on the committer side, we need to be better about monitoring those things. Comcast has decided to invest some time in helping with open source, the community stuff. For lack of a better word, every week we have somebody that's dedicated to, and this position rotates throughout our team. We have one engineer that's dedicated to supporting the open source community. Problem is, not everybody's actually a committer. So if you're not a committer, you can't really help with the deluge of PRs. But
plus we're not, Comcast is not the only people that can merge PRs.
Yeah, right. But I mean, all I'm saying is,
a committer, and Eric's a committer, and Steve.
We're trying. So yes, that is a good point. If we could get help with that.
Merge anything. I feel like if I don't break some use case, just
yeah. I wish more people were afraid, Eric, because some people just.
I want to talk about that later. We have a little bit of extra time. I want to talk about that later because I personally think that maybe we're a little bit too afraid. And I think that brings us back. And I don't think that every single line of code needs to be reviewed by 15 people before it goes in.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm +1 on that.
We should be a little bit more reckless, I think.
Maybe we can meet in the middle on that one. But anyway, so thanks again to Newman for starting this, and for Andy for kind of taking it across the finish line. I mean, getting it to the 1 yard line, we still got to get over the finish line. But I have the link to the branch and his repo in here, just if you want to get an early peek at that. We're going to have these decks available, so you guys can clone this, play with it, pull it. I mean, ultimately, Cisco, if you guys wanted to pull this into your environment, I mean, I can't guarantee that it's going to be 100% perfect, but it's probably beta quality and could definitely be load tested at this point. One more thing. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Am I doing all right on time?
Fine.
All right. So we at Comcast, you know, we've talked about this a little bit before. We all sat in a room and submitted a barrage of talks to ApacheCon, hoping that, you know, it's kind of like when you speed and you're in traffic, you're like, well, they can't catch all of us. We're kind of like the inverse. Well, if we submit enough, maybe they'll pick a couple. So they did, and we got Dwayne and Dan that are going to have one that should be really good. But, you know, just stepping back from my talk or Dan's talk and Dan Adu's talk, you know, this is going to be a really good opportunity for us to showcase what we do that's different than everyone else in ASF. I mean, we're a unique project. There isn't anything really out there like us. So for my part of that, what I would like to do is solicit feedback, or solicit input rather, from the community. I would love to get sizzle stats, you know, from Cisco and from Cox. You know, Comcast is going to have some great sizzle stats too, because we do a lot of throughput, but you know, I would like to showcase the diversity of our deployments. Like we heard Clearwire.ca, is that who it is?
Clear Cable.
Clear Cable. They did a Clearwire was the mobile company in the Pacific Northwest. But anyway, you know, they're running our stuff and we didn't even know. So I would like to be able to have a slide deck up there that says, look, yeah, we're a complicated project that you really have to have a big problem in order to use us. But here are all of the big companies that have adopted our software and have been successful with it. And you know, it might be a little difficult to approach conceptually sometimes, but with Dan and Du's talk, you know, we can lower the bar for entry by Dockerizing all of this junk, and then we can showcase how great this stuff is at scale in my talk. You know, so I want to talk about throughput, I want to talk about deployments, and I don't want to talk so much about Comcast. I want to really use this as an opportunity to talk about the community, because that's why we're going to ApacheCon. It's likely to be on the Tomcat track, so I'm not going to mention the fact that eventually we'll probably ditch Tomcat and switch to Golang, but for the foreseeable future, that's where we are. And traffic router development moves a little more slowly than some of like the API components and stuff. So that might take a while. We may not even start that until next year if we start it. So then we go through, you know, architecture, overview of traffic control, how traffic router and Tomcat fits into that architecture, and the custom integration stuff that we have in there, like the language connector, the custom certificate store, and how we adopted 8.5, and the reasons why we adopted 8.5, namely OpenSSL and the increased performance benefits that come along with that. So I think that's kind of everything that I wanted to talk about for ApacheCon, but you know, be aware, I might hit some of you people up on Slack. We may have I don't know what general pronouns to use. I mean, I don't want to say you guys. So anyway, I'll be hitting people up about that either through Slack or through the mailing list or something. And, you know, so and if you guys think of anything that you think would be important to showcase, make sure to let me know. I think, you know, some of your use cases near and Quilt is significantly different than some of the stuff that we do at Comcast, and I don't know a ton about everything that Quilt does, and I think it would be a good learning experience for me, and it would be good to showcase in, you know, the talk as well. Obviously, I have a limited amount of time to talk, so we have to really pick the valuable nuggets that we want to talk about, but at a minimum we can have a slide up there with a bunch of company logos and stuff like that, you know. So that's kind of it. You guys have been sending me a barrage of questions throughout, so you have more questions, Steve?
Just one, like, which JDK do you use for Tomcat 8.5? Just like A1 or?
We're using 1.8. Yeah, there's a 1.8 dependency in there, and I believe we've fixed the dependency so it's way less finicky. That was a huge problem, and it continues to be a problem because if the way that Oracle manages their releases of the JDK, they really only have the most recent one there, and if you don't know how to hack their URI scheme to get to the prior version, you're kind of screwed. If we're saying install B151, you're like, how the F do I even get that? So we've fixed the version dependency so it doesn't do that anymore.
Yeah, because I'm not even sure I'm using one.
Yeah, so you may be off the reservation if that's the case. We've done no testing, no certification for OpenJDK, and if you're using the GNU JDK, or new JDK, you would be insane. So,
I think we're using the open one. I need to check.
I mean, it should work. I mean, OpenJDK is like the reference platform. I'm just saying your mileage may vary. I don't know how that's going to work. Yeah, dude?
Yeah, that was switched.
Can we use your slide presentation as the template for traffic control presentations?
Yeah, this was a Jan slide deck, and all I did to this deck was I thought it would be super cool
Yeah, I like that.
to do this.
Yeah. I noticed.
Well, the reason why I did this, though, like true story, I've had to use this deck a few times, and I had to present to some execs, and I put this up on there, and I just opened it, and I was like, does anybody have any idea what this means? It's a good way to like get people engaged and make them realize what CDNs are and all of that, because it's the little traffic roundabout. So.
I did. I never even.
It didn't dawn on you that that's what it was?
I never got that.
Right, so people don't really know.
Circles have way more lines coming out.
I mean, but then it wouldn't look like a C, right?
Yeah, it look like a C. Yeah. Not a spoke.
Especially if you redirect from the cache to the router.
Yeah. All right, so that's all I got if there's no other questions.